Hi, everyone, and a huge thank you for joining us today for a discussion on what does a modern DevOps culture actually look like. This is the lead dev webinar created in partnership with Pantheon. The webinar will last roughly 45 minutes, after which both myself and the panelists will head over to the lead dev Slack channel to answer some of your questions in the hashtag technical strategy channel. We may also have some time to answer a couple of questions live, so please do submit those through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them if we can towards the end. So let's get started with some introductions. My name is Stefania Chapman, aka DevStuffOps, and today I'll be joined by Abby Bangser, Robin Osborne, Dan Frost, and Jeremy Dickens to share their experiences and insights. I'll ask each of you to introduce yourselves, who you are, what you do, and maybe why you're excited to be on the panel today. So I'll just go around with who I can see on my screen. So starting with you, Robin.
Hello, I'm Robin. I've been involved in this kind of web development game since the late 90s. I've worked at all points of automation and what might be called DevOps, from dragging and dropping files and taking a site down to full-on 100% automation. I worked at ASOS in the early days, through Burberry, Selfridges, being a performance principal and observability kind of strategist. And so having kind of seen the extremes of what works and what doesn't work and the bottlenecks, I'm just really keen to kind of pick everyone's brains and hear what everyone else has to say and get involved in this community a bit to see where we can go from here.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin. Over to you, Abby.
Hi, I am a principal engineer at Syntasso, where we're building Cradix, which is a toolbox for building composable internal platforms. And that has been built off of my kind of history through the DevOps journey and all that. I actually started my career at ThoughtWorks, which I think is a consultancy well known for being involved in that space. And it's something that I really just kind of grew up with as I was starting my career there. And since then, I've done a lot of work through different kind of supporting internal roles, QA, SRE, platform engineer, and so forth. And I think that has led to this being a very important topic and close to my heart in how to deliver software in the most effective way possible.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. Over to you, Dan.
Thank you. I'm Dan Frost. I'm the owner and founder of Adaptive, which is a Drupal agency. I'm also CTO of a digital marketing agency called TMP. I'm of a technical background since the 90s. I'm not so much hands-on these days at all, but still called upon by my team where I think I can add value. And now I'm far more focused on strategic and commercial aspects, and that's the sort of perspective I'll have today. I'm excited to be here to learn more about the perspectives from other sectors and from other positions within an organisation.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. And finally, Jeremy.
Yeah, Jeremy Dickens, senior sales engineer at Pantheon, where I help customers find the right sort of combination of tooling and platform for their websites. My career has also spanned the last couple of decades, where I've been in development, I've been in operations, I've implemented DevOps for other teams that didn't have it, and led technical teams here and there. So glad to be able to bring that particular perspective. And I'm just excited to hear, what the other panelists' opinions and thoughts are, and curious to see what questions the attendees have.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeremy. And that's the end of our introductions. So to start, well, thanks everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion on the evolving DevOps landscape. So today, the industry experts who've just introduced themselves will be sharing insights on modern DevOps culture, bridging the gap between development and operations, and measuring performance for continuous improvement. We'll explore the distinctions between DevOps and platform engineering, strategies for integrating operations into development teams, and the role of performance optimization. We have a few questions lined up, and we'll be looking for audience questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes, so please feel free to add them to the Zoom Q&A. And let's start with our first question. So on the topic of defining modern DevOps culture, So, Abby, as a principal engineer with extensive experience in platform and site reliability engineering, how do you define a modern DevOps culture? What key principles and practices distinguish it from traditional approaches?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because DevOps has evolved from initial principles into more concrete technologies and practices, often to many people's frustration, right? But I think it's natural that when you have something really high level and principle based, people need to know how to apply it. And so that is a reality and it's going to happen. So I'd first just say I don't think that the principles behind DevOps, the idea of collaboration and empathy and fast feedback loops, has changed in any way. I don't think modern and historic any difference. The reality of how to apply that due to the scale and the depth and breadth of technology requirements an organization is dealing with today is where I think things have sort of evolved a bit, possibly. And the reality is that being able to completely own the end to end from infrastructure up through user experience of an entire application stack is becoming untenable for teams if it wasn't, in the early days even, and particularly untenable for organizations that need that kind of consistency, security, and efficiency across their organizations. And that's where I think the real thing that's evolving DevOps today is the reality of applying domain driven methodologies that we have applied previously to software applications and designing of our entire software organizations to our internal tooling, internal support, which is allowing people to continue to use DevOps principles, build and run your own software, have fast feedback loops, talk to your customers, all those kinds of things, but do so for a more manageable size stack because people are able to then depend on someone else who has those same principles, those same expectations, and provides them what they need. And it's basically creating this internal experience that we've now been enjoying for over a decade or two with cloud computing, where you get what you need from a VM and you don't have to think about it. Well, now what does that VM look like for the organization so that teams can move up the stack a bit? And yeah, so I think that's really the big change in DevOps today.
Awesome, thanks. That's a great overview, especially with your kind of bullet points of all the things it does include and potentially what it doesn't. So, does anyone else have anything to add and to that about defining modern DevOps culture?
I think from from my perspective, the visibility of it across the organization's changed over the years. Whereas it used to be, for us, it was a discrete team. They pick it up from the developers, they do the deployments and so on. And I think it's just, as you said, Abby, it's gone from end to end now. So I think that the visibility and understanding, comprehension across an organization's changed a lot over the years. It used to be regarded as a bit of a dark art, deployment scripts and things like this that were very complicated. And I think now the principles have developed and gone, really stretched into different areas. As you say, infrastructure as code, config as code, and things like that. Those things have built out from DevOps. So I think for us, that visibility and accessibility to these sorts of approaches and methods have really changed things.
Yeah, and it's that abstraction of complexity in the more recent years, as you were saying, with kind of cloud technologies kind of taking that complexity away and going, you just call this API, it'll do all that stuff for you. It's really significantly changed things.
Yeah, it's an interesting space, especially with how it's evolved, because right now we have the term and we have the words, DevOps, development ops, but the whole concept of, having how we create software, how we make it visible, how we abstract it. This has been around for a lot longer. This is just the current label. It's also interesting to see how it evolves and some of the differences of platform engineering, but that's a future question. So moving on kind of to the next question or topic. So bridging the gap between development and operations. So Robin, with your background in performance optimization and DevOps pipelines, how do you see the relationship between development and operation teams evolving? What strategies have you found effective in bridging this gap?
Yeah, I love this one. And even just kind of the framing of it and going back to what Abby was saying, that I'm one of those people who was frustrated about the definition of DevOps. And it's like having a team that does that was in itself a bottleneck. And it's like, no, it's ideate and then prove that the idea was worthy. And it might have nothing to do with environment automation if that's not a bottleneck. And it was just kind of, the collaboration and the empathy. And that doesn't seem to fit well together when you historically, I guess, between development and operations. In the same way, like QA and development, they tended not to be friends, and development and operation tend not to be friends. It's like operations don't change anything because it's stable now, and development is change everything all the time. So it's that dichotomy. And that's where kind of historically that the frustration has been, is what I've discovered, I guess. And it's that migration from kind of a change advisory board, a sit down, are we allowing you to put this into a production environment, pushing against that kind of that increasing friction and increasing momentum of, we want to be doing continual delivery. We want to get stuff into production and change it all the time. So the I guess that gap, bridging that gap, what I've discovered in previous places. So recently I was the kind of observability strategist at Selfridges, and I've been brought in by the ops team, but my background is engineering. So it's like, what do you want from this role? What is your expectation? And it wasn't necessarily around automation pipelines. It was, what is about to be deployed? When does the deployment start? When does the deployment end? What has been released? What changes? What is the risk? What is the impact? What do they touch? Who made those changes? Who is available? So that then kind of brings in that collaboration aspect. And this worked very well when I was at Just Eat, in that it was entirely automated. When a release went out, all of the tickets associated with that release all got pushed into a change log that went to the major incident manager. And when anything went wrong with the production system, it automatically tagged all of those people into a chat. So ChatOps was there, and the major incident manager knew who to talk to, because their changes had in some way potentially caused this issue. So that was incredibly collaborative, and there wasn't the friction between developers and ops. So that worked particularly well. From a performance perspective, it means getting the kind of telemetry and the metrics early on in the process. Don't deploy something into production and go, oh, it's slow. It's being able to prove beforehand that, and it's that proof thing, it seems, from the ops team being able to do their tick and go, I know for sure this will not make things worse because all of these tests that I've done all the way down. And yeah, it was, I think that getting that trust, getting the collaboration, getting the expectation from ops, and not treating it as oh, I don't like talking to them. It's, we have to collaborate, and we will absolutely make sure that what gets into production is as good as it can be, and we'll give you all that telemetry and all that information you need to believe us.
Robin, you just said one of the key words there that has been going through my mind while you were talking, is that in my experience, one of the things that between the teams and the technology, the key point is trust. I've been in so many situations where you had operations and engineering who did not trust each other. But also one of the things that was the cause of that was no one trusted the technologies that they were using. So, if you do not feel confident that you're going to be able to regularly deploy, whose responsibility is that? And if you have code that's going out that's not being properly tested, whose responsibility is that? And all of this stuff just erodes at the trust that needs to be there between these teams. So that's one of the things that I've seen is like, you have to start from that foundation of getting everyone to trust each other and trust the systems. And if you don't, that's where you need to be focused.
Yeah, exactly. That is earned. And similar thing from like the QA to dev, getting the developers to actually thank testers for finding bugs was a big kind of context switch, I think, and it helped to improve trust. So it's like, damn it, you found a break. I was like, oh, brilliant, thank you. You avoided me from some embarrassment of that getting into production.
I think
So
that's
building trust for sure.
An understated part of DevOps, that the resilience it brings with config as code, infrastructure as code, means you're redeploying on different platforms easily. But then that brings a lot of resilience to being able to deploy in new environments should you need to, or whatever. And I think that's quite understated, the benefit, because we were deploying into dev environments, test environments, and so on, to be able to deploy to a completely different live environment very quickly. In the past, as you were saying, Robin, operations would be don't touch the server, don't touch the live environment. That's become less of a thing now because we're deploying so often. So I think that's bridged the gap and built that trust, I think.
I think the word trust has been, mentioned a lot, and especially the other well-known term is psychological safety, because especially when these things are going wrong, you need to be in an environment where you can communicate and collaborate. So, Robin, to your example, I can imagine in some situations, if something goes wrong and everyone is put, in a Slack channel, in some environments, the people there might be like, oh my God, am I going to get fired? Which is not the thought patterns you want to have when you want to try and fix a production incident. So it's very much about, yeah, having these open way channels, whether it's virtual, whether it's physical people, working cross functionally, but able to yeah, trust each other and trust the tools, and then having the layer of visibility on top. So being able to answer those questions, how many deployments are we doing? How many of these deployments are failing? Are there any common patterns we can avoid? And kind of talking on metrics, it kind of takes us to our next question about measuring DevOps performance. So, Dan, as a managing director and CTO, what are top metrics you believe are essential for measuring DevOps performance? How can organizations use these metrics to drive continuous improvement?
So this is very much a perspective-driven point of view. I think Robin would have a far more detailed sort of breakdown of that given his role. But from my perspective, it's simple things like the downtime. Is there downtime? How much is it? What's the target? And so how often do we hit that? The failure rate into and understanding what caused the failure. Is it bugs or failed deployments? Time to recovery, I think, is a massive, key thing. And then, so I think they're from a simplified list, they are for me the top sort of commercial ones, if you like. I think secondary to that, well, not secondary necessarily, but other factors are frequency of deployments, which then feeds into lead time for changes. So I think again, from my perspective, another one is the cost of the underlying infrastructure. In the past, we had a home baked sort of suite of scripts, and we've now moved to Pantheon as platform as a service, effectively integrating with other platforms, and that for us was a game changer, because rather than our focus being on maintaining complex multitude of scripts and so on, to be able to just use a platform that worked, to simplify the process and we build out, that was massive for us in terms of team comprehension, in terms of standardizing processes and so on. So I do think that bit of it for us, it was a huge distraction to maintain that. So I think there's a lot of benefit from using platforms, and DevOps has matured now. In the past it was all sorts of smaller components, and it just feels to me that we use 2 or 3 big systems and we buy them in. We don't build our own. We don't, I like hosted. We don't have to worry about interoperability and compatibility, patching, all those sorts of things. And I think it's made it more accessible across the team.
Yeah, I think DevOps, what you were mentioning there about like the cost of infrastructure. One thing that I think is true today is that the cost of infrastructure, what you're basically saying is the amount of money you are spending on something that is non-differentiating, is sort of a commodity that you need access to. And I think that it's not just money that we spend on those things. It's also human time, which is money, right? It's opportunity cost from the ability to build other things. So I think that one of the big things we see with this increase in complexity and challenges is that we have a huge amount of time spent on delivering just BAU or keep the lights on kind of work. And with a DevOps culture, one where a team truly owns that whole delivery process, hopefully relying on commodities, as you mentioned, Dan, where you can buy them in and not build things that aren't unique to your organization. But even configuring those, managing those, looking at all those metrics we're talking about creating takes time. And what we're seeing in different surveys around the world and different companies doing, it's like 70% of some engineers' time they say are doing non kind of feature creation work. That to me is when I hear someone talk about infrastructure costs, I hear that as well. It's all that sort of underlying cost to get to the business value creation. And that's the stuff that I think we are realizing as a culture that we need to manage a little bit more efficiently and effectively. And so there's some things, that's what's I think brewing in this modern DevOps, is the management of that human time as much as the management of that compute time or cost.
That does kind of remind me, because what you're both saying there, one of the things you spoke about there, Dan, about deployment frequency, one of the things that you measure, like one of those DORA metrics like that, how often can you deploy? I had worked in a company where they wanted to bring deployment time frequency, I can't remember what it was, like 3 months down to 2 weeks. And I was saying, technically you can do that now, but your test cycle takes 2 weeks. So you just wouldn't do any new features. So can we focus on the thing that makes the difference? And like, let's reduce the bottlenecks, because you could do that now, wouldn't help.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about DORA metrics. I say horror stories, but for those in the audience who don't know, they are deployment frequency, lead time, change failure rate or deploy failure rate, and mean time to recovery. And so they tend to be, the first two are about throughput, so how fast can you go, and the final two are more about stability. So I had an example. I was working with a very large, well-known, multi-global bank, and they were tracking it manually with Excel sheets, but they said to me, our deployment time, our lead time, so time from commit to deployment, was 46 minutes. And I was kind of a bit taken aback. It's a very big organization. I'm like, and according to the Accelerate book, that puts them in the elite performers. So I was very impressed, and they said, yeah, but our change failure rate, which, to be fair, before I read the book Accelerate, I didn't actually know was a thing, in terms of, I just assumed, oh yeah, deployments just work, right? But actually, sometimes they don't. And if they fail 0 to 10%, so maybe up to 1 in 10, that's, elite. Their change failure rate, so yeah, 46 minutes to get stuff into production, but it fails 60% of the time. So what that meant, over half of their changes were then failing. And then it would be this whole, chasing around, being like, okay, what's gone wrong? The little cottages of people doing their pipelines, and oh wait, it's Dan, but Dan's on holiday. And they worked out actually that for, what that 46 minute would then take about 2 to 3 days to fix. So actually for 2 days of real work, it took 50 days. So that's why when you're looking at these metrics, it's important not only to look at, say the DORA 4, but also, to Abby's point, the hidden cost of the people. So all the time that, people who might not want to make their work visible, maybe they're happy, oh, it only takes half an hour to fix every day. And then they don't realize, okay, if everyone on the team is doing that, that's obviously a massive cost. So I think it's a really important topic to think, because people also try to game metrics. So it's really important to think about what metric. I can see a lot of nodding. It's also important to think, what metrics you're looking to metricize. So moving on to the next question, and if anyone in the audience does have questions, we'll be taking them in about 10 minutes. So DevOps versus platform engineering, and this is a really good topic that we can really get into. So over to Abby. With your work on Qualtrics and internal platforms, can you explain the differences between DevOps and platform engineering? How can organizations determine which approach is better suited for their needs?
Everyone loves a versus, even when it's not necessary. So yeah, I just believe this is apples and oranges. One is about a principle of the way you work and support the software you're building, being DevOps in my opinion, and one is around how you optimize and make more efficient your internal engineering organization, and that would be platform engineering. So are you in an organization that requires that kind of efficiency, consistency, risk management or not, is something that we sort of tackled as a part of the CNCF working group for platforms, which I'm a co-lead of. We released a white paper describing platform engineering, but more recently, we've also released a maturity model which helps organizations identify where they need to be, where they might be, and therefore what gaps they may have or over investments they may have. So if you're a small organization with tens of engineers and you're still not quite sure anyone even wants your product at scale, if you're sitting up near the top end of the maturity model, this is a uniqueness, I think, to this maturity model. You actually get a little bit told off for that. Hey, what are you doing up there? Like, that's a lot of investment to get to an optimizing level of platform engineering, given that your organization is actually needing you to move faster and be more agile in that stuff, in the way you're working. But vice versa, if you're a large organization and you need a bit more stability and scalability and as a service kind of offerings, you do need to be investing in that. And where do you invest in that with your people, your time, and things like that? So yeah, apples and oranges in my opinion. But what platform engineering I think is doing, and why I'm so happy to be a part of the organizations that are working on it, is it's enabling DevOps to scale. It's enabling teams to stay in a build it, run it culture, despite a lot of organizations now pushing back on that and trying to take the run it side of things away from application teams. It's enabling those teams to continue to keep those feedback loops to production by removing some of the things that are less differentiating for those teams. So I like to say that platforms build the things that are unique to your business, or that are unique to your business, but common to the teams within your business. Go buy the stuff that is unique, that is common to the whole industry. Build only the things that are common, that are unique to your business, but also only the things that you can leverage across multiple teams, and allow the teams that need more unique things to still build their own stuff. That's that DevOps culture at play. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah, I just love that one of, differentiate on the things that make your company different, as opposed to being a software house and rewriting stuff that people have already done hundreds of times.
Don't do it.
Yeah, love that.
Yeah, it's a big part of it. I mean, by standardizing like that, you sort of, you're not getting caught by the gotchas, as we were saying earlier, where Dan wrote a script 4 years ago for a scenario on a Friday afternoon that runs on a Raspberry Pi under somebody's desk. All that sort of thing is gone because, as you say, standard principles, different config and things like that, but using the same principles, it just makes such a big difference. It's transformational to buy into those sorts of methods and that sort of thinking.
It's a very hot topic, and I think, to your point, Abby, we don't really need to do the verses. They are separate, and it really depends on who's using it. Are you a one-person band? Are you an enterprise organization? Do you need to specialize? Can you buy stuff? I've worked in vendors for almost a decade, and I do find that organizations that sometimes will try and do, oh yeah, we're building our own CI. Okay. We'll be back in 6 to 12 months. Let's see how it goes.
Tell me how that's going to beat your competitors at selling widgets as well. That's the big question.
Exactly, because it's all about the opportunity cost. It's like, is this the best use of your time? And there's a lot of hidden cost and opportunity costs that usually aren't taken into account, especially looking at vendors like, oh, it costs this much, but it'll save you this much. No, we're just focusing on that for now. So moving on to adding ops to development teams. So over to you, Jeremy. Many development teams struggle to adopt best practices with CI/CD pipelines, deployment strategies, and other common DevOps tools and methodologies. What recommendations would you have to a team that is looking to embrace a DevOps mindset but is experiencing challenges?
Yeah, you can actually amplify that out through a lot of the threads that we've been talking about. But what I typically recommend to teams is not to try to boil the proverbial ocean. You will find these teams that have kind of become enamored of the DevOps concept, which is great, or they realize that their deployment processes are broken, which is a good realization to come to, but they're in a lot of pain. But the implementation side of that becomes really daunting to them. So, you can find a service or a platform that can help you. You can implement things one bit at a time. I think that's really the point where I've recommended that teams take a step back, figure out what they actually have control of, because sometimes they are teams in a larger organization where there's institutional entropy around their ops stack, right? There's an entrenched ownership of operations, so you can run into conflicts that way, and it goes back to that whole building trust between the two teams. But trying not to just reinvent yourself overnight is the first thing that I recommend, and focus on the one thing that would be the most impactful. Going back to Robin's example of, well, you could change that thing, but that's not actually going to help you. Do a survey, figure out what is the key component that would give you, what's the low hanging fruit? What will give you the most immediate gains? And then focusing there. And if that is build the relationship between the development team and the operations team, then start there. You don't need a new tool necessarily. You need to build that trust and rapport between the two teams.
Exactly. And also kind of going back to what Abby was saying at the start of DevOps being the culture. And if your bottleneck is a relationship between teams, then that's where you need to focus to improve the flow. So yeah, totally.
Definitely an interesting space for sure, because historically it's been very siloed. And now, as with DevOps, and with encouraging a culture of collaboration and continuous learning and psychological safety, we're starting to see, roles merge. I was working with an organization, a year or two ago, and what they were saying from the developer perspective is that, okay, developers, write code, but now they're also running their pipelines, and now they're also deploying to production. And they kind of went a whole circle, and the developers are like, actually, can someone else do this? Can we just focus on developing features again? Because, we only have so many hours in the day, and developers as a mindset, it's like, yeah, new and shiny, this is really cool.
Yeah, there's a be careful what you wish for, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So moving on to performance optimization in DevOps. So Robin, can you share some insights on the role of performance optimization in a DevOps culture? How can teams effectively integrate performance best practices into their DevOps pipeline? And also after this, I'll be taking a couple of audience questions.
Yes, yeah, great. So at Burberry for quite a few years, I was the kind of performance strategist, and coming up with the performance strategy, like where do we want to get to? What do we want to optimize? How do we know that we're doing well? And given that like the DevOps culture implies agility and continual improvement, if you have a team or a company that does their performance testing once you've deployed and gone, yeah, that seems to have made things slow, we don't really know why, that's not really fitting into how we would prefer things to happen. So from the performance strategist perspective, it's looking at, okay, you can do tests in production. There are tools like web page test, site speed IO, Google's Lighthouse. So there's loads of things you can do there, and that's pointing at a production website. That's too late. Let's be a little bit more mature and do it in a pre-production environment where maybe you've got a release candidate. Maybe you can run pretty much the same tooling there, but it might be in a private environment. So things that only work on production deployed endpoints maybe can't reach your private environment. So you need a bit more experience around that. You can deploy things like site speed and web page test tooling internally, but Lighthouse can't reach in unless you monkey around with the firewall, and that's a bad idea. So let's bring that back a stage to kind of the continuous integration area. So, right, and something is about to be merged, or you've got a pull request or a merge request. Now there's a lot of tooling that we can start using there. So there's a Google Lighthouse can run as a kind of a CI server. Really a bit fiddly to set up, but once you've done it once, you've got this simple deploy that can keep historical performance data based on a baseline of your trunk, I guess, and then it compares it to a pull request. It goes, this pull request looks like it's going to degrade performance based on the trunk. So when you deploy this, it'll probably slow things down, or it won't. And you can then make that choice. It's not a case of it's slower, don't do it. It's a case of it'll slow it down maybe by this much. And then that's a discussion with like a product owner of, are we willing to take that risk and fix it later on? Is this feature going to increase whatever that metric is we want to increase, probably money, compared to us taking that hit on performance, and we can kind of say slower site, lose this much money, this feature, get us that much money, we'll take that risk. So that's kind of based on the PR. Even that, getting a bit more mature, but we can shift that back even further to be running on the developer's machine. Like Lighthouse runs in the background as I think you can even just install it from NPM now, and it will just kind of sit there running in the background, watching your code. When you do a change, can give you some feedback saying the thing you've just done has had this performance degradation. So you can learn really early, and the benefit of doing it in these consistent environments is the consistency. Production environment, very inconsistent. Internet weather, devices coming out all over the place. You really are just kind of guessing, getting a general feel for things when it's in production. Even if you think you're testing on exactly the same kind of VM or whatever, that's got to go over public internet. That's not reliable. Let's do it on infrastructure that you know about. So if you're in AWS backbone, way more reliable than public internet. and being able to deploy stuff into things that you're responsible for, using images that you've built and you know what they're running, and they're configured, throttling network in ways that you've defined, then you're learning early. And we managed to build a lot of this stuff into Burberry, as well as getting not just performance from a customer experience perspective, but performance from like load test perspective. Like there's so much tooling out there. Going back to like Apache Bench was one of the old ones, still great. JMeter, still great. Then you've got like K6IO, and you've got like, what was it called? Angry Swarm of Bees or something? No, bees with the machine guns. That was it. Like from GitHub, where you just went, here's an endpoint, go, and it would spin out EC2 instances, run loads of tests, and then scale them down again, just to see what your breaking point is. So again, within Burberry, for every kind of PR, it was a case of these are the features, performance has not degraded, requests per second has changed by this much or this much based on load tests that are all automated. So by the time it's gone out, we're like, yeah, we fully trust it. If any of those are breached, then it's a flag. We go, whoa, hold on a sec. Should we really do this? Are we happy with that degradation? Okay, we'll let that go. But the biggest change was about getting a performance-aware culture, to the point that when I left, I mean, it took 6 years, but when I left, we had designers asking techies, the engineers and the product owners, will this design change impact performance? How will it impact performance? I was like, yes, exactly. Let's not put a carousel on that page, for example. Like no one looks through a carousel. It's so much extra tech and images that are just wasted. Go to shouldIuseacarousel.com. I don't know whether that still exists, but basically it's a big page that says no. Stats just say you should not use carousels. They are a waste. And it's like, there's a lot of overhead for that. So just put an image up with some text, and getting that culture where non-engineers were asking that question meant that we were already succeeding. So that was kind of that collaboration thing, that we know we're doing well when it's embedded within the culture.
I think the one thing I would just say is all of that just rings true with me with that story that Stefania was just saying of like, but all this is coming onto the devs now. And so the thing that really comes into my mind there is the, just to add more words to the soup, is people talk about shifting left, and that's what you're talking about here, being able to shift
Exactly.
the feedback left. But often by shifting feedback left, you're also shifting implementation or ownership or complexity or so forth left. And what there's a great article by Richard Seroter from Google around shifting down. So what you want left is the feedback loops, not the complexity of implementation, ownership of getting that data and those sorts of things. What you want is to surface only the thing you care about, when you care about it, where you care about it. So what he talks about is shifting down the implementation, the actual alerting of people, the actual like surfacing of the information into your internal platform where that is unique to your business, where you care about performance coming into play, and security and eco ops and all those other things that you're going to worry about into that platform that you have, so that the feedback loops can be as far left as you're talking about, straight back into where a developer's changing a line of code on their own computer. So
yeah, and I think you're quite right. And one of the key points there is that the engineers weren't doing a lot of this work. We had a performance engineer team that were responsible for load testing, and then working with me, they were doing their performance optimization testing. So that was the infrastructure and the tooling, and everything was kind of being set up so that it didn't impact engineers too much. And as you said, it just surfaced those metrics. So they were going into like Git commits as comments. It was just like automated stuff, like, you have done this commit, I'm going to run some tests and give you a little green or red, looks okay, doesn't look okay. And it would kind of automate the process. So the metrics were just coming up when you needed to make a decision. You're quite right. But having that specialist team, again, kind of really helped there. It's kind of platform engineering, but for performance.
And even that, you've mentioned some of the core DevOps methodologies in terms of fast feedback. It's like, oh, we do the change and then we can immediately see the performance effect, rather than getting that 3 to 6 months later. By then it's done a lot of, effect on the performance. So I'm conscious of time because we've got just over 5 minutes, and I did want to take a couple of audience questions. So there was, so everyone in the audience, thank you for posting. We're not going to be able to get through them all, so please head over to the Slack channel and we'll be able to answer them there. But I want to start with one that was very relevant to our topic around culture. So I work in a company where engineering is still very much divided into dev and ops. How do I begin to break down that wall and introduce the culture of DevOps?
I'll take a first stab at that because that's something that I've experienced directly. I think the first step is doing what you can to make sure that there are common touch points between those two teams, those two areas of the business, whether it be a formal working group or a more informal kind of cross collaboration. Look for those opportunities to work with them, and let that trust begin between the two teams, and then you can start to see where that can take you and where you can bring these principles and tools into play. Sometimes getting the ops team to relax from their ownership, or getting the dev team to work on collaborating with ops and not seeing them as the old grumpy people on the other end of the ticket request, can be the first challenge.
And on that one as well, just because we had to kind of have this, I didn't want to do that. That means battle. We had this discussion in Burberry in order to get the agreement to do more frequent deployments from a change advisory board to what we're deploying. Even though it's new, it is exactly the same template as this other thing that you have approved, and the functionality and the dependencies are the same. So we're happy for you to deploy that. So all of the API platform was, I guess, microservices and Lambdas, and they were all based on a template. And it was like, you've approved that template from a support perspective, from a telemetry perspective, from all of these things. You've given approval for that. We're happy with that. We're just doing another one of those. That's it. It's calling this other thing, doing some clever work, and exposing it into a graph, kind of federated graph QL API. So it was kind of getting approval for the shape of something, as opposed to this is a completely new thing. And that helped to bring the trust in. So then we could gradually do that for the front ends as well. It was kind of a micro front end architecture, right? This thing that you've approved and we've gone through in detail, we're just doing another one of those. So you're happy for us to deploy that more frequently? Cool. And then it gradually ate away at the stuff that was slow until we could deploy quite frequently. But again, it was a lot of discussions and a lot of trust and a lot of we don't hate you, honest kind of situations.
I think what you're getting at is it's. Oh, sorry, go on, Dan.
Thank you. I think even in small teams, I mean, we've got 20 developers, DevOps people, and so on, and even in teams like that, we've created a manifesto that's kind of guiding principles for them all. That's got the perspectives of each in it, and we've tried to make it more of a culture rather than a set of demands. Do you know what I mean? That says it's just that understanding of perspectives, isn't it? We did it through sort of a manifesto, so it didn't get super detailed. It was much more about listen and understand and all that sort of, and some core guiding principles. And then that feeds into change. So when something's changing, to stop the guy setting up a Raspberry Pi that does a weird thing on a Friday afternoon. We've worked on that and we iterate it over time rather than having a detailed operations manual, because they're hugely experienced, talented people. It's just perspectives, isn't it? So I just think we try and do it through that rather than micro instructions or demands. I think that's an important thing, to respect each perspective and their experience.
The big thing is to make decisions, you have to feel like you have enough information. You have to feel like you actually own those decisions. You have to have accountability. So what I'm hearing from you, Robin, is that it's a business decision to invest in this. And it's true. It needs to go across multiple departments. It's not just something often one team can decide on. And what I'm hearing from you, Jeremy, is around trust. And the maybe less cuddly side of that answer, but necessary, is that people need to be accountable for what they put into production. We keep talking about how to deploy faster, but if you're not actually then responsible for the things that you deploy, we will continue to have DevOps be a separate team, which is basically just an ops team.
Yep.
Like when you have a DevOps team, you have an ops team. You don't have a DevOps team. And so what you need is to have somebody who, when they deploy into production, they actually are alerted and managing if their software has created problems. And obviously that creates a lot of challenges for an organization to figure out how to pinpoint, is it the infrastructure, is it the software, and what change and all those things. But that's really the kind of mecca that people are trying to get to. So in trying to so back to the main question, trying to introduce this in a culture that doesn't exist, putting into place expectations on career growth and career ladders around responsiveness to customer challenges in production and responsiveness to errors and incidents in production is a really quick way to get engineers who are younger and hungry for that career growth to start building that culture of awareness. And that will take time, but that is where you can start to get to, I think.
I love what you said, Abby, because I come from the opposite. I'm like the soft and fluffy. I'm kind of like, okay, we're all people. Is this a bottom up or is it a top down approach? Let's all sit together and talk about our problems. And then, oh, wow, DevOps fixes this. So it's very much, especially when you're talking about culture, you want things like psychological safety. Do you feel that you can raise this with other teams without them finger pointing, where you can talk about the work or the incident rather than, oh, that person did that? So I think we really need, that's what's great about these types of panels. We really need kind of all the viewpoints. I'm conscious of time, so I've got, for the audience questions, head to Slack, but I have one final question, which we're going to do as a bit of a lightning round. So talking about adopting new DevOps trends. For all panelists, we can start with Robin. From a strategic and commercial perspective, what are some of the latest DevOps trends that you believe are worth the hype? How should organizations approach adopting these trends?
So, in brief, we hear a lot about AI ops, which, as far as I can tell, it's people not understanding what that really means. And it's about a lot of this stuff you can already do, that kind of event correlation and kind of anomaly detection. But what I'm quite interested in is using, potentially having the chat ops side of things optimized. So maybe whether it's a specific large language model that ingests all of the metrics in your business so that you can have a more conversational root cause analysis that normally needs some very specialists in every area to attend a call or a chat, being able to say, this system went down. What do you think that was? What could it have been? And knowing what all the connections are and what all the metrics are, just giving it in bullet points that anyone in who can speak that in language, whether it's English, French, whatever, as opposed to speaking engineer, ops, security. That's a specialist kind of language within themselves. But just having a bullet point of going, oh, that system was kind of overloaded because of that thing that happened because of this marketing thing that we sent out. Okay. I think that would be interesting. So like Amazon's Q has, AWS Q rather, seems to be a bit interesting. I'd like to see where that goes.
Cool. Over to you, Abby.
Awesome. I think the thing I'm most excited about is this realization that organizations need to reduce the complexity on any one team if they really want those teams to actually own production incidents and production aspects. And I think that sort of has come from the book Team Topologies in 2019 gaining popularity. That's helped with that messaging. And so I'm excited about where that goes with organizations thinking about their team split ups not as dev and ops, but as streamlined teams and enabling teams and platform teams and organizations. And on top of that, I think as soon as you start talking about platform organizations within an organization, within a larger organization, you have to start thinking about how do you deprecate and stop using custom things that you've built when they've become possible. So that this idea of thinnest viable platform or floating platform from Gregor Hope is the idea that if you tie yourself to a custom implementation you made 10 years ago, you will never be able to elevate because you'll be spending all your time with that. So let's not just think about adding new things to the platform, but actually keeping that platform as lean as possible to provide the business value. So those are the two trends I'm most excited about right now in that way.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. Over to you, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, we're deliberately fast followers as opposed to bleeding edge because the nature of what we do, we don't have some of the needs of Burberry potentially. You know what I mean? Our clients don't necessarily have those needs, so we consider ourselves fast followers, and I think that's okay, and again we rely on the platforms to bring that in. I agree with Robin that AI needs to underpin and integrate as opposed to regarded as a single entity. I think it needs to underpin and connect, and we've played with I think they call it Amazon Q rather than AWS Q. I think it should be AWS Q. They call it Amazon for some reason, but we've played with it and it seems extremely promising, but some glitches with it, unfortunately. But that is sort of trying to be the glue, which would be fantastic if it could work. So, yeah, I think AI, the lazy answer, isn't it? But I think AI, but the way it's integrated and the way it's deployed is key, not just on its own side.
Oh, thank you, Dan. Over to you, Jeremy.
It's funny. I think we're split 50-50 on the panel because I'm going to sort of amplify what Abby said. Seeing organizations look at their current technology stack and making smarter decisions about what to own and what to buy or what to, effectively lease from the cloud is one of the things that I think is going to be most impactful as companies realize that their total investment is more than just the AWS bill or the Google bill. It's what people are having to do to maintain it, and offloading that to other teams and having basically an ecosystem of products and solutions that they are choosing from and composing together to help their business, as opposed to, hey, we've got a data center in, Central Europe we have to maintain. I think that's one of the things that I expect to see more and more larger organizations kind of finally come around to.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy, for rounding us off. Thank you, audience, for all your questions. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for all of the insight. We've covered a lot of topics. We've talked about culture, we've talked about trust, visibility, safety, metrics, performance. So I think it's been a really valuable experience. We'll all be heading over now to the Lead Dev Slack channel in the #technical strategy channel. So please head over there if you have any additional questions and also to continue the discussion. Thank you for joining. Have a great day, and we hope to see you next time.